The PGA Championship is going to be at Oak Hills East. It is this weekend. That's in New York State.
Yes, it is.
Talk about the odds that you found and who's listed as the top five to maybe look at trying to get a win here at the PGA.
Well, what I found interesting was this list actually is not that much different than the list we presented for the Masters.
You're right. A lot of familiar names.
A lot of familiar names.
But there's a reason for that.
There is a reason for that. I mean, Vegas knows what they're doing. So what's odd is it wasn't easy to find this information. This is from a sports book I had not heard of before, Bet365 sportsbook, so valid as of today. Jon Rahm.
And that's Wednesday for those of you listening later.
Yep. So Jon Rahm listed here at plus 750.
He's the favorite.
But Scotty Scheffler right there, too.
Yeah. Well, again, those are your two Masters winners in the last 2 years, and Jon Rahm coming through in a big way at Augusta. I mean, he was on this list. I think Scotty was one, and Rahm was right there when we talked about this in April, either one or two, Jon Rahm. So I mean, these guys are playing at a high level.
Well, and Rory McIlroy kind of bursting back onto the scene again, if you will. That's as much as I know about golf. At plus 1,200, Brooks Koepka plus 1,800, and Xander Schauffele. Okay, we'll go with it. Plus 2,000.
You got to watch more golf, dude. It's a lot of fun. I will tell you, my pick here is Brooks. I think he has won the PGA before. I think he can be dialed in this week, and I think it's his tournament. And you can get some favorable odds there at plus 1,800 if you can get in on that. Even if it's a smaller wager, you can get a fairly sizable return there. And he wouldn't be that. It's not like you're picking a space cadet.
Not coming out of nowhere.
Correct. The guy can play. Well, not to brag or anything, but we wanted to start with that for a little cold open on the podcast here. Weather Wagers is back. Brett Thakra, Dan Tomaso, and boy, did we call that one last week.
I was going to say, did you win out on that?
Well, you know what I'm mad at myself for?
You didn't follow your own advice?
It's not that I didn't follow my own advice. I forgot.
You forgot.
I forgot to put in the wager last week. Can you believe it?
You know,
I was busy with, my son's got baseball, and I'm working all the time, and it's just been a busy season that I forgot to plug in the bet. But
perhaps
it
worked out because you did forget.
Well, no, I would have been right. I would have had a good turnaround.
But you would have done it.
Well, that's true.
And then nothing would have happened. It would have been the guy that I couldn't pronounce his name.
Yeah, I think you're right. Maybe it was best I let off. But we look smart anyway for a week, and we will take that. We also called the frost delay on day one.
We called the frost delay. I said to you, you go to New York State, and it's not quite summer yet. Watch out, because it gets cold, especially when the air is this dry. And if you're around the Northeast, you're around the Mid-Atlantic, it's been dry, it's been quiet. Almost San Diego type weather. Even again, as we're recording this on Wednesday, it is an immaculate day out there.
It's gorgeous. It's low humidity. It is absolutely phenomenal. But of course, we are here to talk about when the weather is not so phenomenal.
That's true.
We're gonna get into some more of our baseball picks. We've got a special guest today. Brad Powers is in the spotlight. He is a professional.
You definitely want to be around for that.
I think so. He really revealed a lot of things. He's a professional handicapper from Vegas. He stopped in and he said himself, weather, very important.
I was surprised how adamant he was, and perhaps he likes the concept of this podcast because he has, not to give too much away, but he has his eyes on games and on the weather at the same time. And so very much one of us.
If you want to try to win when you're placing wagers, I think you have to. And I think that's why we thought this would be a good idea. So we're going to get into that. Dan, tell everybody where they can find us here, of course.
Well, as always, we are everywhere. So you can find us weatherwagers@gmail.com. On top of that, you can find all of our latest shows available right after they happen on YouTube. That's the ABC 27 News YouTube. You can find us there. You can like, subscribe. In addition, any podcast platform, whether it's Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Google, we got you covered there. Plus, abc27.com. For those of you that are old school, just like to type in a web address, you can find us right there under the weather tab. Again, Weather Wagers.
We make it easy, and you can send us your thoughts. Maybe there's a guest you want to hear that we could try to invite on, or some games that you want us to pick, or talk about the weather. You can find us weatherwagers@gmail.com. So let's talk about Major League Baseball. You know, we called a few games there again last weekend with these rainouts, right?
How about the Mets?
You said last week they have been the team most affected by the rain.
The rain cloud just continues to follow the franchise. And, I mean, that's the way Steve Cohen thinks.
Was that Timmy Trumpet there?
It might have been Timmy Trumpet there. Timmy Trumpet hasn't been blowing his horn because, unfortunately, the real reason why Timmy Trumpet was around was Edwin Diaz, who's out for the year. But it's unfortunately been the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast timing out weekend rain lately. This weekend, though, getting a break of sorts.
Yeah, there's not many series that I was able to find. Again, the weather across the country is pretty quiet, but we did find a couple.
I will say this much. This is where it's almost criminal there's no baseball in the Carolinas. It's a big baseball area, and they're going to be most affected by the weekend rain, but there's no Major League Baseball in the Carolinas. It's still hard for me to believe. It's 2023, and there's no team there.
Are you calling up Rob Manfred? Are you going to tell him that it's time to expand?
Nashville wants a team.
Nashville,
I mean, why not the Charlotte area? Why not Raleigh-Durham? I mean, those are all growing areas.
I think Raleigh-Durham would be fantastic. And, this coastal storm that's almost tropical in nature.
Yes.
It's a little early for that, but almost. I mean, that is the bullseye there in the Carolinas. We'd have something to talk about. But when I looked at the big map, and we're going to show you that coming up, there's really only two areas of concern because a lot of teams, of course, do play with roofs and domed stadiums, but a couple that don't, that may be affected. The Mets are traveling to the Rockies, and here we go again with the Mets.
It's following them. I mean, they're going out west, and they can't avoid it.
Now there's going to be a daily chance of showers and thunderstorms over the Rockies. And then, of course, our Phillies going to Atlanta. What did you say right here on this podcast about 3 weeks ago? What was going to happen with the Braves?
Very active southern jet. And
El Nino.
El Nino. So I do think the Braves are going to have their fair share of issues with rain over the next couple of months. If anything, I would say this weekend is sort of in peril, and it's an important weekend because it's a 4-game series. There's no off day to kind of help with any problems with scheduling.
Right. So we targeted the the Mets and the Rockies for Friday and Saturday. I think the Phillies get their Friday game in Atlanta, but when we look at Denver there and the Rockies area, it's just this diurnal heating thunderstorm chance, the lift that's created by the Rocky Mountains.
This is El Nino influence too, by the way.
It's going to have a big impact this summer. But I will say, Dan, I don't think that this necessarily means they won't get the game in. But again, if you're looking to make a wager or play these games, you have to consider that Friday and Saturday's games in Denver are going to be in peril. I mean, look at Saturday again. We go into Saturday late afternoon when these games are going to take place around the Colorado Rockies Stadium. They a lot of the models are indicating this daily chance for showers and storms. Meanwhile, here comes the coastal low at Truett.
And this is the weekend I actually have an opportunity to watch a little baseball is the weekend the Phillies go to Atlanta, and Atlanta's getting probably what looks to be a soaking rain and a very slow-moving rain system. I have a feeling, just a gut feeling, there's going to be some type of controversy here with the rain because I feel like they're right on the edge. Will they be totally impacted? Will they
call it early and then get burned?
Or will they try to sneak it in and get burned that way too?
Yeah, we don't want to see a repeat of, again, what Keith Hernandez called unconscionable with the Mets Nationals. We don't want any controversy here. So let's take you out through Sunday because, again, I think the Mets Rockies get in on Sunday, but now look at the coast. You pointed it out. The heaviest rain is in the Carolinas, but look at Atlanta.
It's right there.
It's right there. They're going to get wet.
And
this is an important series. It's really one of the first series that the Phillies have played in their division.
And I actually expect them to play well this weekend because the starting rotation starting to round into form while Atlanta's has completely fallen apart. Completely. They don't even have it as of last night. They didn't have a starter listed for Thursday. So I think this is a good opportunity for all the Phillies griping that's going on. If they take 3 or 4 here, they could gain 2 games on them.
Well, they need to do something. Not that I want to. We're not going to dwell on the Phillies this episode. But again, here we are. It's June. They're below 500. They should have been, in my opinion, more competitive with the Diamondbacks than they were. They did have some good games against the Cubbies. But Dan, again, several months into the season, to me, they should be putting it all together. They're just not yet. And I know you're going to say it's early. They got hot last year. Baseball isn't necessarily about what happens in March and April and May. It's not. But I will say, again, I expected more this season so far, even though I don't expect them to be perfect. But I expected a little more, and I'm waiting for them to break out. If they do it this weekend against the Braves, great.
Well, I think this is the opportunity. I think this is what they need. I think the intensity level is going to be ratcheted up. I'm just not sure right now. The Diamondbacks and these teams from the West, the Diamondbacks are the second best team in the NL West, and it's by a long shot.
Yeah, and that's actually surprising because
a lot of young guys.
My son is a big Phillies fan. We watch the games. He always asks, is this a good team? Because he doesn't know what the team's yet. And I kind of said last night, not really. And yet, when you look at their record, I said, let me amend
I
that
think
statement.
they're 8 or 9 over 500.
They have a better record than the Phillies. I said, never mind. I said, they are a pretty good team. However, having said that, they came to the Phillies' house. What's the record, Mr. Shiner?
29-20.
Yeah, 29-20. So again, they are a fine team. That's where I expected the Phillies to be, and they're not.
And I think they're going to be. I really believe in what's happening right now because you have the division lining up in a way. You're going to get a lot of divisional games coming up, and both the Mets and the Braves have abysmal starting pitching. Outside of Verlander and Scherzer, the Mets have nobody right now. The Braves are down their top 2 starters, and at some point the camel's going to break.
Well, listen, I hope you're right, and we're going to keep watching that play out.
Here's one other thing. It's a little bit of positivity, too. So, the Phillies went on this run last year. They have a better record now than they did at this point last year. So, again, everything's in perspective here that it's not pretty right now. I get it. I get frustrated, too. However, we're only just past the quarter point of the season. There's a lot to go.
As the weather guy and 2 meteorologists, numbers are important. Numbers matter. When you put that into perspective and say, you know what, they had a worse record last year at this point, it's a great way to look at it. We are currently dealing with, I feel like we've had baseball rainouts for my son's league every weekend. So there's a perception.
Saturdays, right?
Yeah, but there's a perception among people that it's been a very wet spring. However, that's not true. We actually are 4 inches in the hole for the year.
Yep.
We're actually experiencing in central Pennsylvania, where we do this show, the number 1 driest May on record.
Which is hard to do. May is usually a pretty wet month.
Listen, it's perspective. When you play a sport and it keeps getting rained out, you may think it's a wet period, and it really hasn't been. And so when you look at the Phillies this year, you think, man, this team and these stars, they should be doing better. They actually are doing slightly better than they did last year, and then they went on the run late. I think it's good perspective to have.
And do you know what month it is coming up?
June.
And do you know who hits the ball, the cover off the ball in June? I think
Schwarber.
Mr. Shiner knows.
Kyle
Schwarber bombs away.
Yeah.
And he's showing signs. And actually last night, so going back to Tuesday night, 8th inning, Schwarber's up, man on first and second. He hits this, not a screaming line drive, but a low line drive to center. That ball was caught by Fletcher, the center fielder for the Diamondbacks. I think it had a 96% chance of falling in, and he made a tremendous play. Would have tied the game. Baseball's a game of inches.
It is.
And it could turn at any point.
And there you go. Golf and baseball, a game of inches. Now, also a game of inches, college football. We are going to talk a little bit about a few things in the college football world before we get to our special guest, Brad Powers. And that is a little TV talk here, okay? Mm-hmm. We're in the TV business. We like talking about the TV
and you've
the
been
media
all over
race.
this. I mean, Brett has been the go-to guy. He's sending me articles. He's keeping track of these commissioners, keeping them honest. And it's a mess right now because I think the money has gotten so big.
Well, I want to show you here. I want to show you the Penn State football schedule because now these are the known TV games and times. Okay, because the draft, I just heard this week that the TV draft is done. So they know what weeks and who gets what and all of that. And remember, the Big Ten is now split between the 3 broadcast networks of Fox, CBS, NBC.
I'm never going to get used to this.
The Big Ten Network and FS1. Those are where the
no
Big Ten
ABC.
will be. Nope, ESPN is out. They're all in with the SEC, especially starting next year. They also have the ACC and several other rights, Big 12 and so forth. But as the draft is done, and when I say the draft, I'm talking about the TV networks all draft weekends that they get games. And depending on the weekend, they can start to figure out where they're going to go. Now, some weekends they have to pick the games yet, depending on how good the teams are. But here's the games that we know. We know that Penn State opens against West Virginia at home. That's a 7:30 primetime game on NBC.
Wow.
That's the kickoff to NBC's Saturday night Big Ten coverage.
Do we know who the broadcast teams will be? I guess we don't know that yet.
We do know that.
Oh,
the main broadcast team for NBC is going to be Noah Eagle, Ian Eagle's son, Todd Blackledge. And I forget the sideline reporter now. But come on, that's important. That's important, Dan. That's
Nah.
important because you
Let-
want
Let the
to
game breathe.
No, because the sideline reporter creates these moments with the coaches. You know that.
I guess,
No,
but-
they do because I'll never forget the time when Holly Rowe was interviewing James Franklin about the officials, and she asked him what everybody on the couch was thinking, and he just glared at her. That said it all, and that's why I think the sideline reporters are phenomenal. So, but it's going to be they're calling it Blackbird, Todd Blackledge
love it.
and Noah Eagle. So
I mean, what a way to open on NBC
yeah.
with a former Penn Stater.
Is it going to be Michelle Tafoya?
it is not going to be Michelle
not?
Tafoya. I
Okay.
know that. I think it was. I think it may be the person that did the Notre Dame games before, but don't.
But not
don't,
Maria Taylor would be good, too.
She's the studio host. She's
Okay.
the studio host for Saturday Night Football and now Sunday Night Football.
I might
So,
not be able to find this on my dial in the
Catherine
fall.
Tappan?
Catherine Tappan, I believe, is the sideline reporter. I believe.
Okay.
So
That's
is
a name
your
I
team.
don't know.
Now the second
Notre
game.
Dame.
Yeah,
That's
Notre
why.
Dame. The second game that is scheduled is the Whiteout, which is going to be at 8 p.m. on CBS. So that's going to be hard for Penn State fans to get used to as well. But
Wow.
that is the Iowa game. And some people might say, now, wait a minute here. Why isn't it the Michigan game? Well, I think we know why. When you look at some of the games on this schedule, remember, Fox has the A-tier rights,
Yes.
the number one rights. That game is probably going to be in their big window, which is big
Yep.
noon. Now, that may not rub Penn State fans the right way, but that's just the world we're living in. TV controls these things. So the whiteout game, Iowa gets
Well,
that treatment instead of
You
Michigan.
say that. Mm-hmm. But I also think these weird end-of-season rules for the Big Ten are part of the problem, too.
We're going to get into
Yeah.
that. But no matter what, I don't expect that game to be in prime time. And then one game that will be in prime time is now, it just came out this week, and there was some controversy here, and that's what we're going to get into. Michigan State, the land-grant trophy rivalry, the best trophy in all of sports.
It's great, and it breaks usually every year. Something breaks off of it.
That game is now going to be played on Black Friday, and it's going to be an evening game on NBC. So Black Friday is going to be the Iowa-Nebraska game, likely in the afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
Then it's going to be an NFL game on Prime around 3 p.m. There is a law that protects the NFL from infringing on college football. The NFL cannot be played in prime time on Black Friday. There is a rule. So that's going to be like at 3 p.m. And then this there's no time set for Penn State at Michigan State yet, but it's probably going to be around 6
Wow.
p.m. or 7 p.m. They don't know the exact timing yet.
Sure,
So
sure,
that's
sure.
why I just have on there Black Friday evening. But those are the three games that are scheduled. Now I do want to point out, gentlemen, that to me, before we get into some of the issues, this is exciting. I realize that I am going to miss Chris Fowler, Kirk Herbstreit, Holly
I'll
Rowe.
happily move on.
I miss. Nobody does college football better than ESPN. I'm going to
That
tell
I
you
do
that.
agree. I mean,
Okay?
from a quality standpoint,
Yeah.
the shots, the production.
They know
I mean,
how to tell a story.
You're a director, Shiner.
Yeah,
Tell us.
I mean, even just the game day experience with them being at the
On
big
campus.
games every year.
Yep.
I mean, we all know Herbie loves a whiteout. He's talked about it for years and years. So, there's a little bit of like, it's not quite the same not being on ABC. They do it, I think, just about as good as anybody can. But I'm curious to see what it's going to look like
So here's a
on
question.
a different channel.
Do we think NBC and CBS are going to, kind of like Fox, start a rival program to that?
I don't know if
on-
they're going to start a rival
Well, because
program.
Fox has theirs
Yes.
too.
They do. They've
That's
got
a
the Urban
similar
Meyer-
thing.
the Urban
and
Meyer
the Barstool
show.
guys too.
I actually like Fox's coverage
They
sometimes.
yeah.
they break down the X's and O's pretty well. That's where Urban does come into play.
And I kind of like the personalities a little better.
Well, yeah. Now I will say, if Pat McAfee's a staple on game day, that's
That'll
going to help.
make it better. That'll
that's
make it
gonna-
better.
that's
But
gonna
there's
help.
something with Desmond Howard and
yeah.
what's his name? Not
The
AJ
the-
Pollock.
David Pollock.
David Pollock,
David
Not a
Pollock.
fan.
And we all know Corso's been a little rough
His
the last
health,
couple
and
of years.
he's
Health is
old. I mean,
declining,
he's old.
but
He's old, and I love him. I don't want him to go. but-
Herbie's the best on that show. And we
Absolutely.
don't
Of course.
really get enough of him, in my opinion.
yeah.
Well-
no more heads on though.
Yeah.
Well, no, I think he'll. I mean, I haven't heard he's not going to be there this year.
That's
but
true.
We'll
That's
see.
true.
But I also think Herb Street. The reason we're getting a little less of him is he's doing everything.
yes, he's
Well, yeah, it's
everywhere. and
NFL as well.
He's got
And
a
the
jet
NFL.
set out.
But having said all of that, I do think that Penn State fans, Big Ten fans, have also noticed in recent years that the ESECPN
Yes, yes.
has had a slight bias, and
Just a
whether
slight.
whether or not it's real or perceived, I do think that having these games on different networks, I think CBS, Fox, NBC, they are going to have their own agenda of making sure they pump up the Big Ten. And boy, won't that be nice for a change to see that. I do think from a production value, you're talking about the best network that does a primetime game, NBC, with Sunday Night Football. They're going to know how to produce a Saturday night game.
Yes.
You're talking about CBS that has had the premier SEC game for 15 years. Vern Lundquist, right now, Brad Nessler, Gary Danielson. People can complain about them, but they are a top rate.
I like them.
It's a top rate production.
Yes.
So,
So
quick question:
that
Does
whiteout game on CBS should be top rate.
Yeah. Does this mean that NBC is not going to be broadcasting as many Notre Dame games now?
No.
Because they used to have
No.
They get it all.
exclusive rights, right?
They still do. They have exclusive rights to the home games.
Got
So
it.
sometimes it's going to be a doubleheader where Notre Dame is going to be at home at 2:30.
Yeah, they
like
do
have
that
it.
offset start so
Yep.
that they always catch a little bit of both games at the end.
And then they will bleed. That will bleed into the primetime games.
Okay.
Now,
That's
the
exciting.
people said,
Yeah.
"Well, now wait a minute. If NBC's the primetime Big Ten game, why does CBS have the 8 p.m. whiteout game?" So here's the deal. This year is going to be a little weird
Hodgepodgey.
because CBS for one more year still has the SEC game, which will be at 3:30.
Yeah.
The Big Ten will move to that slot in a year from now. But the reason that CBS was able to put the Penn State whiteout on in primetime is that same night, Ohio State goes to Notre Dame. That game will be on NBC.
Got it.
So they get the Notre
Okay.
Dame. They're going to
That
put
makes sense.
They're going to
Yeah.
put big Notre Dame games on in primetime.
Yep.
So they still have the rights to those, and they'll work the Big Ten around it. But there was some problems with this TV deal because apparently Kevin Warren left town before he got it done. Now this sounds weird, but there's been reports. Pete Thamel of ESPN broke this. You can read the full story there. I read it on
It's deep.
ESPN.com, and The Athletic has had some things about this as well. But apparently, according to Pete Thamel, the I's were not dotted and the T's were not crossed. So there's a couple of issues here, guys, and one of them
An
happened.
agreement in principle was made.
Correct. One of the issues was that he promised a Big Ten title game to NBC. So most of the Big Ten title games are still going to be on Fox. One or two are going to be on CBS, and one is going to be on NBC. Now, apparently, he didn't have the authority to do that. Fox owns all of the rights, and they sublet them to every other channel. The issue is that Fox wants the Big Ten title games. So now some of the schools are going to have to pay back money to Fox, even though NBC is going to have this game, because Warren promised them this game apparently without it really being his authority to do so.
Quick question about this. Do we know, we don't know the new structure of the Big Ten yet, right? We don't know if that championship game is going to be just top two teams or if there's still going to be a West and an East.
Technically, we don't, but there will not be a West and an East.
Yeah, that's what I thought, but I didn't know if anything official has come
Nothing
out.
official has come out.
And that
but-
could be
but
part of the problem,
you,
too.
You heard it here.
Yeah.
There's no more divisions.
Yeah.
So
God, won't that be nice?
it's going to be the 1 and 2 teams, which
Yeah.
is going to be
Yeah.
exciting. But anyway, so that's part of the problem. And then the other part of the problem you hinted at. For many years, in fact, for all of time, the Big Ten has refused night games in November. Now, that changed when this TV deal came out because NBC has a primetime game every week through the end of the season. So it's like 14 or 15 primetime games, okay? Now, some of the schools apparently, again, did not agree to this. And Warren went ahead and did it anyway. Now,
Which I kind of like.
there's a couple of ways to look at this. Number one, it's 2023. There are primetime games. It helps your program.
Look at the SEC.
Right. Some of the bigger schools have, kind of thrown a fit about this.
And I don't understand it. I truly do not
Let
understand
me
this.
help you understand it. And I'm not saying this is right or wrong because ultimately I'm with you. If you want exposure and if you want your conference to be in the limelight, play in primetime.
Yep.
I don't care what
Bingo.
it is. I think if you're a Michigan State, an Ohio State, even a Penn State, and those are the schools that griped, by the way, I will tell you. When you get into November, there is fear of a primetime game being too cold and too snowy for transportation to and from the stadiums. That is their biggest beef. They are afraid about fan safety and fan comfort. Now, I'm just saying that's the reason.
Yep.
Your response to that?
How many times has there been an issue?
Well, none because they don't play primetime games.
Well, but my point is even let's go back a couple of seasons. I mean, it's been a while. I mean, I guess lake effect snow being
Lake
excluded.
effects, and that's what. Don't forget about that.
Yeah, but for Penn State, It's not been a factor now. It's not to say one freak storm can't happen, but it has not been a factor. I mean, we're not talking about December. We're talking about November.
But hold on. Pretty soon we are going to be talking about December.
Well, right, with playoff.
But this is the counter to that argument. Penn State already committed money to winterizing its stadium. So do all the. I mean, Michigan is going to be in the 12-team playoff. Yes.
Yes.
I mean, Ohio State is going to be in the 12-team playoff, right? Penn State will probably certain years be in the. Michigan State may even one day be in the 12-team playoff, right?
They'll want a home
They were
game.
the 4th-team playoff. So.
They will want. Yeah, you're right. They made the 14 playoff one year. They will want. They're going to winterize these stadiums. This is not a concern. And by the way, of the issues, this is not a. They are going to play these games. Case in point, Penn State and Michigan State now moved to Black Friday in prime time.
Well,
they're not happy about that. They are not happy about that, but they're doing it.
Here's the thing. When you get into November, in December, if you have a 3:30 game, you're playing into the dark no matter what.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
So-
What's the difference between 7 and 10 p.m.?
Not much.
Well, and when Penn State had the delayed game against Michigan State due to lightning, right? I mean, that was a 3:30 game that got pushed to almost 7 o'clock by the time that got going again, too. Wasn't it a
that
3-hour delay?
I don't think that
Like,
finished till close to 10 o'clock at
Yeah.
night.
I mean, that's.
Listen, I'm with you guys. But my point is, again, I think the communication was lacking. I think there were certain things that schools
Or
would want to know.
politics.
Politics, all
Yeah.
of it. So it's a messy deal for Tony Petitti coming in and trying to clean up Kevin Warren's mess.
However, I'd much rather have this mess than having no deal at all.
Well, and
then-
also, one of the reasons Tony Petitti was hired was he's a TV guy.
Right.
He understands that. I don't think they're going to have a problem here. I think this is
so
it's,
two parties need each other, and
it's fun to talk about in the doldrums of May. I think it's going to get done. I think everything's going to be fine.
And I think the Big Ten product is going to be better for it. Like you said,
Yes.
you got networks that want to pump it up. You have time frames that make a little more sense for the big games, and fans are going to like it.
There's no way they cannot. I mean, it's going to be great. Now, again, that puts, I will tell you again, that weekend of the whiteout, September 23rd. I already told you guys this. Penn State welcomes in Iowa on CBS. NBC's got the Ohio State Notre Dame game.
It's going to be fun.
ABC will likely have Florida State at Clemson. That's 3 big games all in the same window. But isn't that what we want?
Yeah.
Isn't that what the NFL does?
Mark me off that Saturday.
Yeah.
Let's call it now.
I like it. All right. Finally, before we get to our special guest this week, Brad Powers, Pac-12. They still don't have a TV deal, and now we're hearing things. I mean, I've read reports that it could be until August. ESPN, Pac-12 kind of shutting down talks right now. ESPN needs and wants that 10:30
Yeah.
slot.
They're playing hardball.
But what they are not going to do, and keep in mind who owns ESPN, Disney's. I don't want to say Disney's fallen on hard times. That sounds ludicrous. But what they have done is they've tightened their budget. Nobody knows what the economy is going to do. They also have. Not only are they concerned about the troublesome waters ahead in the economy at large. But I also think this comes down to they want to ensure the sports media bubble hasn't popped yet. They're paying top dollar for the NFL. They're not giving up the NFL for the Pac-12.
Yeah.
They're not giving up the SEC for the Pac-12. They had to let go of the Big Ten, for goodness sake.
Right, because they paid too much for the SEC.
But I think they need to. Well, you say that, but the Big Ten's making more. I don't know if they paid too much, but they have their priorities.
So they set the market is more my point. They didn't have to go the level they did, and it helped the Big Ten in the end.
I think
But-
so because of our shorter deal the first time, we were able to come over top of that.
Right.
But I also think they need that real estate. They want the viewers' eyeballs at 10:30. Nothing
Yeah.
drives. I don't care if it's Stanford, Washington State. You guys and I, we are college football. They're going to be watching that
Yes.
at 10:30, even if it's 2 crappy Pac-12 teams. However, they don't have a deal yet, and none of the streamers are coming through. Could this be the end of the Pac-12 if they don't get this done?
I certainly hope so.
No, I think we need more conferences.
Well, but this is what I see happening. I truly see the USC, the UCLA thing becoming more of almost like a West Coast version of the Big Ten.
like a division, almost.
Almost like a
I hate to
division.
use it because
I
there
know.
won't be divisions, but it almost seems like that's where they want to
I
go.
think that's exactly where it's going, and I think it's, to me, and I said this to you privately, that as a football fan, I'm tired of the Big Ten. I'm tired of the teams and the makeup. I'm tired of the Michigan State, the Ohio State, every single year with Penn State. I want more variety as a college football fan. I want to see Penn State become more national, play these West Coast teams, get some of these West Coast kids.
It's in play. I think it's in play.
I would love. I think it's exactly what a program like Penn State needs. Now, the Michigans and the Ohio States, they're not going to like it. But I think
Well, but Ohio State especially, they're national anyway.
Well, right,
so
but that's my point.
Yeah.
How do we get on that level? I think
Right.
expanding the conference, playing these West Coast teams, changing up the schedule year to year, I think it's exactly what James Franklin needs.
Well,
one of the big things too is
Yeah.
people always complain that no one knows what's going on the West Coast. So if you start bringing these West Coast teams to the East Coast time slots,
It's gonna help
now,
them, too.
Oh, is Washington good? I don't know. I haven't seen them because they're always on at 11 o'clock at night. So I think that will help promote even just those teams getting a little bit more notoriety. Now, obviously, their local markets are watching those games. But I think the rest of the U.S. is just so in the dark on what's happening in the Pac-12.
Well,
I would agree. And
How
it may
about
help
this?
them.
From a recruiting pitch, a lot of the issue with Penn State is you're in the middle of nowhere. And then you're playing these other teams that are in the middle of nowhere, whether it's Wisconsin, whether it's the Indianas, I guess Columbus is not in the middle of nowhere. But you get what I'm saying.
no, it's not. And I will say
not
this:
big city vibe,
the
though,
SEC also has a lot of schools in the middle of nowhere. Believe it or not.
Yes, they do. But the fan base is just different.
Football
It's
is life
different.
there. It's a little
But-
different.
but if
But
you-
again, I'm going to push back on that a second, okay? Because I hate hearing that too. Penn State has as rabid of a fan base as any
do.
SEC school. So does Ohio State. So does Michigan. So do even some of Iowa, for goodness sakes, has a rabid
But I
fan
think
base.
the conference as a whole doesn't have that everywhere. Where the SEC, it's almost ubiquitous that everybody's nuts.
Well, yeah, could be right. But if these schools want exposure, to your point, I think the conference is going to have to break up and they're going to have to go to the Big Ten or somewhere else. But again, that's not happening yet.
No, it's not happening yet.
But there's no TV deal yet.
And let's face it too, a lot of this could just be a lot of posturing. Could be, well, we're going to dissolve and do our own thing, or nope. We still want you. We still want this to happen.
Definitely.
There's going to be some middle ground found.
100%. Well, it is time to head into the spotlight. And Dan, you and I had a chance to talk with Brad Powers, who is a professional handicapper from Las Vegas. We wanted to bring him in. He's all over Twitter. He does radio shows throughout the country. He was kind enough to stop by. We talked about college football future win totals for the teams. He's watched 66 spring games, he said.
He's got a lot of monitors, I suppose, but there's a lot of good tidbits in here. So I think you want to pay attention if you do gamble. There's a lot of good advice in here. If you're a college football fan, there's a lot of good advice.
I think that's it, too. Whether or not you actually place wagers on this, there's some good tips. But just in general, if you love the sport, we talk about a lot of teams. And I think we may replay some of his stuff throughout the summer
just
because
dialed in.
He's dialed in. He was very smart. I think he thinks a lot like we do. And we ask him a few questions about the weather. So without further ado, here's our interview now with Brad Powers. Our guest today comes to us straight from Las Vegas, Nevada, and is a handicapper that runs his own company, Brad Powers Sports. And you can hear him on various podcasts and sports talk radio shows all over the place. So we're thrilled he's here with us today on Weather Wagers. He is fresh off watching every spring football game from every conference. And we are thrilled to welcome him to Weather Wagers to talk all things college football as the season is just a summer away. Brad, thanks so much for coming on today. We appreciate having you.
Well, appreciate you guys having me on. I look forward to talking some weather and some football.
Well, and that's where we're going to start, actually, with the weather. Before we get into the nitty-gritty with everything specific about college football in just a bit, I want to start with the weather. Dan and I, we're meteorologists. We have tracked numerous weather events over the years, from tropical storms to lightning to wind to lake effect snow, and all of these, of course, have an impact on outdoor sporting events like football. We've seen lines move days before a game is scheduled depending on the forecast. As somebody that does this for a living, Brad, how important is the weather forecast leading up to an outdoor college football game? And can the forecast actually help move a line or an over-under? What are your thoughts on that? What have you seen?
Oh, it's significant. I mean, in some cases, it can be more important than a starting quarterback's availability as far as the weather conditions go. So, I mean, that's how significant it is. I mean, on a college football Saturday, I have 9 monitors up. At least 2 or 3 monitors are just weather only, whether it's, just a Doppler radar or it's, a Twitter timeline of all local meteorologists like yourself. And I'm getting local updates like that. I personally go through and look at the wind conditions on Saturday morning. I wake up at like 4 a.m. in Las Vegas and look at the weather. I mean, I'll put it this way. If you're just waking up on a Saturday morning, I'm going to bet the football, I'm going to bet the big Alabama game tonight, you're doing it wrong. You will lose long term.
Wow.
If you want to wake up on a Saturday morning and bet, look at the weather. You can have an edge if you do the homework and the legwork. Not only look at the Doppler radar, but I would say as we transitioned more and more to the air game, the wind is everything. Don't necessarily look at, is it going to rain or not? That's not going to impact the total. But I'm here to tell you, anything above 15 miles per hour in the wind forecast, that will start moving a line as far as a total. And if you're getting 20-25 mile per hour wind, I'm not just talking a half point. I'm talking you're going to move the total 3+ points.
Well, and I think we saw that this past fall
We
when
did.
I think it was it Ian or one of the tropical storms that we forecast that came up the East Coast, some of the games in the Carolinas, we saw that over-under just drop like a rock. Now, I was thinking maybe it had to do with all the heavy rain, but it was the wind. And so you bring up a good point there, Brad, that the wind has a big impact, especially with all the quarterbacks. But, Dan, you wanted to talk about actual betting and bettors.
Yeah, I mean, so far you're speaking our language, Brad. I really appreciate this. So, do bettors tend to stay away from weather impacted games, or do they try to like outsmart the line, outsmart the forecast if they know what's going on? I mean, there's deals to be had, right?
So guys like myself want to get out in front of it because, I mean, you guys mentioned the tropical storm that came up through the Carolinas and Maryland and Virginia. Some of those totals moved upwards of 10+ points as far as we're betting the under. We want to get out in front of that because, I mean, you're going to give me 10 free points because I had the information quicker than the other person. I mean, that's some of the best bets we can make in an entire season of hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of bets. So guys like myself aren't afraid of it. We embrace it. We love that we say a prayer for all the families that could be affected. But I mean, the more weather, the better when it comes to being a bettor. The average Joe probably going to be scared, or if he's not scared, he's Johnny come lately. He's betting on game day. He's betting into a weather forecast that's already priced into. And sometimes what I've seen lately is it gets overpriced in the market. Everybody, the weather's going to be bad. The weather's going to be bad. And that's all you hear. You just get one-way action all week long. And sometimes you get too much money on the under and it over-adjusts itself. So, as you can probably tell, I mean, it's pretty – if you're a bettor and you want to take it serious, you got to be passionate about the weather. It's got to be on at least your radar, so to speak.
I think he just came up with some phrases for this podcast.
Well, I was going to say
catchphrases.
that's exactly why we have the podcast, and it's something that we've known for a while, but that confirms it here from the experts. So let's talk some actual football now, Brad. We've got a lot of teams we want to discuss. You've reviewed all the spring games, the transfer portal now closed again. The season win totals are out there now on some sites for the taking. It's finally time to start thinking about the lay of the land here for next season. We do want to get specific with some teams. We're going to ask you about each one. These are teams that Dan and I have talked about on the podcast that we find interesting, at least on paper, and what we think we know about them. But let's start in the Big 12. Let's go to Texas. In its final year in the conference, many pundits like them to win it this season, but can they actually do it? I need to see something from Texas to believe it. Is this the year Steve Sarkisian puts it all together? I think the win total's around 9.5. So what have you seen from Texas?
Well, let's talk from a historical perspective. If there's one program in the country that's been a classic underachiever the last decade, it's been Texas. In fact, since 2010, they've only gone over their season win total one time in 10+ years. So historically, they're overpriced. This year, I'm finally kind of buying it. I really am, because they were one of the spring games I did watch. And I think, at least on paper, they can be a top 5 offense in the country. Even without Bijan Robinson at running back, they're loaded at the skill position. I think Quinn Ewers, as long as he is more consistent this year, which he should be in his second year as a starter. And I think Sark is one of the better play callers in all of college football, regardless of how you view him as a head coach and his inconsistencies there. But man, from a play calling perspective, he's got plenty of weapons to deal with. And I think the defense has improved. So it wasn't one of my favorite wagers I made so far in season win total market because of their past history, but I bet over 9.5 on Texas.
All right, let's stay out in Big 12 land. Oklahoma, disaster last year under first-year guy Brent Venables. Is there a reason you think this is a turnaround year? I mean, is his recruiting after last year a bomb? I mean, what's going on? Has he forgotten how to coach? Yet the number is around 9.5 win total. That seems pretty high. What's with that number?
Yeah, it seems really high considering they had a losing record a year ago. But, man, when you look through the schedule, they're only going to be an underdog in one game, that being against Texas. You look at the talent level. He not only brings in one of their best recruiting classes in recent history, but he also brings in a ton of studs via the transfer portal. A kid from Indiana that I think McCullough is his name, probably a first-team all Big 12 type of ball player, just has great length on the edge. I'm worried, though, because there was no – you pop into film on Oklahoma last year, particularly the bowl game against a good Florida State team, and Oklahoma's down several starters. They're playing a couple of freshmen on the offensive line. They should get smashed in that game. I bet Florida State. And they almost beat the Noles in Florida. And you could see the talent level. the X's and O's do concern me. So I think 9.5 seems high. That's about where I made it, just because I think they're just more talented than the Texas Techs and the Oklahoma States of the world.
Now let me just ask a question about that, a follow up with that, because they have some talented guys, and when you look at the schedule, as you pointed out, they're only an underdog in one game. But isn't that similar to last year? I mean, how much does that weigh into these season totals? Because it would be very easy to say, okay, they're only going to be an underdog against Texas, so let's take the over. But last year they really underachieved. So how can you kind of make sense of that for us?
Well, yeah, it's kind of a loaded question. So you just can't,
Right.
John Q. Public's going to go to the schedule and mark down, win. Oh, 11-1, go over.
Right,
So,
right.
Even if, like, I'll put this in this perspective. So say you're a 17-point favorite in every game on your schedule. That's still mathematically going to compute to about 11 win total. Chances are you're going to lose one of those 12 games, even if you're a 17-point favorite on average. Sure. So you can't do it in that regard. You asked me about how does that impact their total this year? Well, I mean, even though they're only an underdog in one game, it makes guys like myself a little bit hesitant to bet over 9.5. With that being said, we actually like to look at a profile on a team and a program over a longer sample size. In college football, it's not Major League Baseball where you got 162 games. It's 12 games. It's very short. So you have to have kind of this base of a standard as a program. Over the last 5 years, what have you been historically? Teams don't, for the most part, I'm speaking in generalities, they don't necessarily change. I mean, Alabama doesn't become a South Alabama overnight. It would be a steady regression or progression if you're going an upward trajectory. So there's this baseline, and Oklahoma's season win total has been around 9.5, 10 for 5-6 years. So we're looking at last season more as an outlier.
That makes sense. That's great perspective. So let's switch over to the ACC quickly and talk about Clemson, a team that many feel has taken a step back. Dabo has had substandard QB play, and he doesn't use the transfer portal much. He got whipped by Tennessee in the Orange Bowl. So where is this team right now? Maybe they can win the ACC, but could they possibly get back to the playoff? That's the question we have. Their win total, again, I mean, they're sitting at around 9.5, seems to be a popular number, but their schedule isn't easy. I mean, they have to play Florida State early. Now, that one's at home. They travel to Syracuse, NC State, and Miami. They welcome in Notre Dame in November, and then they end the year, Brad, with North Carolina and a trip to Williams-Brice Stadium. Where is this team going into this year?
Well, I'll start. I think they're in better shape than a year ago. I really like the Garrett Riley hire. That's, Dabo admitting that maybe the whole family and all about culture, hiring outside that culture basically for the first time, maybe says that hey, there's been a weakness for us the last couple of years. I like Klubnik at quarterback. Again, offensively, I think they upgraded from an X's and O's perspective there. So, and I think the fact that their two toughest games, Florida State and Notre Dame, are both at home. I mean, they've only lost one home game since 2016. It was their last home game against South Carolina, but I mean, prior to that, they had won 40 in a row. So I like Clemson, but I will say this. It's the first time coming into a season since 2014 that I don't have Clemson, the number one team in that conference, in a power rating on a neutral field. I have Florida State 1, Clemson 2.
That's incredible. Well, so then where does Notre Dame fit in? Obviously not a true ACC member, but plays that schedule. Marcus Freeman coming off a rocky year, featured losses to Marshall, a terrible Stanford team. Played the Buckeyes close, though, and destroyed that Clemson team from last year we just discussed. And they also beat an SEC foe in South Carolina in the bowl game. Uneven season, to say the least, for year one, but their season number is 9 wins. Should we buy into a better year? Can this team win 10? But the schedule doesn't get any easier for them, right?
No, it doesn't. I mean, they play, 3, in my opinion, legitimate top 10 teams. You're talking Ohio State, USC, Clemson being on the road. The weakest of the 3, but it's on the road. So I want to go under. The only thing that's keeping me from going under 9 wins is Sam Hartman. Because I think it's a legitimate, maybe one of the biggest upgrades at quarterback that we've seen in college football this year. I mean, Drew Pine was just not a Power 5 level starting quarterback. And now you're going to the all-time leader in ACC history as far as passing touchdowns. Watch the spring game. It popped. I mean, I'm a Notre Dame fan, and they haven't had a quarterback that can push the ball down the field like Sam Hartman probably since Brady Quinn, Jimmy Clausen. It's been almost a generation since we had a legitimate quarterback. So that's the only thing keeping me off of betting under.
That's interesting. Yeah, to me, Notre Dame's going to be really fascinating to watch, especially in Freeman's second year. So, all right, let's go out west. We're going to shift over to the Pac-12. And the one team that may matter out there is USC. They've got Caleb Williams returning. They play in a weaker league, or at least that's the perception right now. I mean, none of it matters if it's the same old story with Lincoln Riley, though. Can he find a way to improve his team defensively? That's really the question going into the season. Now, I think their number's around 9.5 as well. They have some games that raise my eyebrows. They go to Notre Dame, and then they have to play Utah, and then they have to travel to Eugene. So is there any reason to not take the over with this USC team?
Yeah, I mean, defensively, I mean, there's an issue. But all jokes aside there, I bet over. I just – even if they trip up at Notre Dame, which I think that game's going to be right priced around pick, even if they trip up on the road in Eugene, I still think they can take care of business against Utah and Washington at home. So I bet over. You also expect some of my bets are, anticipating the market move. I mean, people are going to want to bet under 9.5 on USC, especially with our proximity here in Vegas to California. No, you bet over. You get in front of the market and decide what to do later in the summer. Here's what I did see in the spring game. Didn't see much Caleb Williams, but he played 3 plays, touchdown. I mean, it was just like, wow, that's the best player in the country type of material. One thing I really liked what USC did was I wrote down in my notes, they need help at the line of scrimmage. They're still not there yet. So what does USC do post-spring? They go out and get the best offensive lineman available in the transfer portal. He's from Wyoming. He'll help in the interior there. And they went out and got Bear Alexander from Georgia, probably the best defensive line prospect that was in the transfer portal. Right. And more importantly, defensive tackle. They need more weight and size in that interior. So I liked what they did there. I like USC to win the Pac-12. You mentioned nationally, Pac-12 probably is not getting respect. I'm here to tell you, I think it's a legitimate conference. I think there's 5-6 top 25 caliber teams. Maybe not a single national title contender, even counting USC, because they're so one-sided, offensive oriented. But, man, there's a lot of legitimate, decent teams in that conference. Washington, Utah, Oregon. And Oregon State's probably the quietest 10-win team I've seen in Power 5 college football in recent memory.
Yeah, and they do prove that, you can trip up any week out there. And so that's a good point about Oregon State. Quick betting question before we move on to another team, because you mentioned it. You talk about getting ahead of the market. So would you say something like that? If you're thinking about betting on one of these season win totals, is it good to try to get ahead of the market now, for example, or should you wait until early to mid-August and then jump in if you feel really confident about something, just to see what happens through the summer? Just talk a little bit about what you mean by getting ahead of the market and how you kind of like to do it.
So it kind of depends on where you're at as a bettor.
Sure.
If you're a beginner, I wouldn't recommend season win totals. Why? I mean, it's basically an interest-free loan for the sports books. I mean, they're tying up your money until late November, December. So you want to make sure you have an edge, a significant one. This isn't game day. Oh, I think I have a couple % edge on this particular bet. I need to have a significant edge for them to hold up my money. So I, generally speaking, for your average bettor, don't bet season win totals. If you want to bet something now week 1, because they don't hold your money up that long, even though it's still 3 months. For a guy like myself, I bet 85 season win totals already. I feel like I can price it better than anybody out there as far as they're opening. Am I going to bet a season win total in August when the market is mature? There's more liquidity in the market? No. But am I going to bet when DraftKings or whatever book out there opens up a bunch of season win totals? I'm going to bet them, because I'm just betting that individual bookmaker. And I'm guessing he didn't watch 61 spring games like I did. So I think I could beat him rather than beating the entire market as a whole, if that makes sense.
It does. Very good stuff. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so now let's move south. You have the Alabama hat on, but let's talk about the Dogs in Georgia. I mean, it seems like it's their title to lose. It would be really quite something if they did it again. Their number sits at 11.5. They have one of the easiest schedules in the history of the sport, so it seems. Maybe you'll tell us differently watching these spring games. It doesn't feel like a total exaggeration, though. So without wasting any time, let's focus on who can compete with this team. In the West, it feels like Alabama, LSU. Let's start with Alabama. Can Nick Saban make it back to the playoff this year with plenty of uncertainty, with the most important spot on the field, the QB?
uncertainty is the word that I would use with Alabama. And we usually haven't used that word the last 15 years. Now, look, on paper, they're going to be favored in all 12 games. They got as much talent as what they've had. What they don't have, in my opinion, watching the spring game and even with the Tyler Buchner transfer, they don't have the number 1 overall pick at quarterback. And the last 2 years with that number 1 overall pick at quarterback, we're talking 4 or 5 games per season coming down to last possession. Yes, they lost some close games that they could have easily won last year. They also won some close games. Texas A&M, that they easily could have lost those games. So for the first time in 15 years, I bet under their win total. Don't ask me which 2 games they're going to lose, but I think Texas is in play. LSU is in play. I bet under because I just don't see it from quarterback. And I'll tell you another thing I don't see. What's made Alabama great, and Nick Saban the GOAT as far as what I've seen in college football in history, is they've been buttoned up. They've not only been the most talented roster and the best coach ever, but they've been buttoned up. They don't beat themselves. They don't turn the football over. They don't get penalties. What have we seen the last couple of years rise up? Penalties, especially on the road, false starts, pre-snap penalties.
That Tennessee game is the perfect example.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And then also, in the spring game, I'll keep it to this year, bunch of drops. And Nick Saban comes out and says, we have more drops in this game than we did all spring. Why is that the case? Why are the little things not being done with Alabama football that I saw done for a majority of 15 years? He's 71. Father Time's undefeated. Maybe the little things that they used to do correctly are rising up and maybe beats them in a couple games this year.
Well, he's also over in Rome right now, so it's the first time I've seen Nick Saban take a vacation in all that time as well. But when he gets back, he's going to have some cleaning up to do. Just real quick on Alabama, who is going to be their starting QB? I mean, did they bring Buchner in to start, or do you think it's going to be one of the guys in the spring game?
So I didn't understand it at first. Why? Because, you listen to Tommy Rees and Nick Saban post-spring. They talked about inconsistency. They need consistency from their quarterbacks. Tyler Buchner is inconsistent. Tommy Rees should know this. Tommy Rees is the guy that decided to bring in Sam Hartman and thought, man, maybe Tyler Buchner's not my guy. So I didn't understand the move. Here's what thinking about it deeper, I think this is a possibility. I think Alabama might be running the quarterback a lot more this year. So Tyler Buchner's a lot more mobile than what people give him credit for. Maybe Milroe's running a lot. So you probably need an extra body if you're going to run the quarterback position 15, 20 times a game. It helps to have another guy in that quarterback room. That's that's just me trying to make sense of that transfer.
Yeah, well, again, it makes some sense.
Yeah, I guess I didn't think about that because I'm thinking Bill O'Brien offense, but this is going to be totally different.
Yeah, and that could be another reason things were sloppy in the spring game. So who do you got next, Dan?
All right, so we want to talk about LSU. You mentioned them, another team looking like they're up to task. They look well-heeled. The first year under Brian Kelly seems like it was a pretty big success. So why can't they do it again this year? They recruit well. They have a quarterback. They probably have improved their defense. But the opener that they have, Florida State and Orlando, that's tough. Then they go to Tuscaloosa this year for the revenge game. They're 9.5. A win total. So, but other than the opener in that game at Alabama, are we missing something? Is there something to watch out for with the Tigers?
No, I'm bullish on LSU this year, and they should be favored in the remaining of their 10 or 12 games. Other than those 2, in fact, they're about a 2-point favorite against Florida State right now in the markets. So, my expectation is they'll win that game. The only thing that bothers me is they won a couple games. Last year, they probably shouldn't. Auburn being one of them. Arkansas, if KJ Jefferson plays, that's probably a loss the week after the Alabama upset. One thing I did like from the spring game was they looked buttoned up. They were very businesslike, went about their business. There wasn't stuff off the field or whatnot, distractions like there was in the Ed Orgeron era. So I think that they are a better team than last year, and that last year's team won the West, even though from a power ratings aspect, they still would have taken Alabama over them at the end of the year. But the only thing preventing them from winning it this year, you mentioned the schedule. If they were hosting Alabama this year, I'd pick LSU slam dunk to win the West.
Wow.
Yeah. The only problem is they do have to go there. But again, Brian Kelly, one heck of a coach. So that's going to be a fun race to watch. Now, before we move out of the SEC, Brad, two other teams that Dan and I have talked about this offseason here on Weather Wagers that we're kind of fascinated by, Texas A&M and Auburn. Let's start on the Plains. They've got a new coach. Hugh Freeze comes into town to try and turn things around from the Brian Harsin era, which actually shouldn't be that hard to do. However, the talent isn't where it needs to be yet. Although Peyton Thorne coming in at QB from Michigan State, Hughes used the transfer portal pretty well from reports during his first offseason. Their number sits at 6.5. So can the Tigers make a bowl game this year? That seems to be the question.
I think they will. I think 6.5 is a really good number, and it's probably trending up because of the transfers that he's added. They're still well behind the Georgias and the Alabamas and even the LSUs of the world. You're right, though. He did a great job in the transfer portal. Really had to shore up the line of scrimmage. If you look at not only the freshman class, but the transfer class, I mean, just a lot of bodies on the O-line and D-line for him. And I look for purpose. I look for a game plan. I look for proof of concept. And they played in the pouring rain in the spring game. But I actually liked what they did. I mean, they said, hey, the game plan was to throw a bunch. They didn't. They were very purposeful. They leaned on the running backs in that game. I think that is a strength, that running back room. I loved the holding over of Cadillac Williams there as a running back coach. Hugh Freeze is really good. Over the last 15 years, the best ATS coach in the country. If you're blindly betting on individual games against the spread, Hugh Freeze is number one in the database as far as college football coaches. So I like the hire. You're going to have to give him a couple years, though. If the expectation is, hey, we want to be a West contender, it's not happening this year.
So I heard two tidbits there. First of all, the Hugh Freeze against the spread tidbit, but even more than that, are you suggesting if it does rain, we can bank on Auburn having a plan?
They had a plan. They can run the football, and I'm talking not just Hunter. They had 3-4 guys very capable of carrying the load.
That is good to know, because inevitably they're going to have some weather to deal with. All right, now on to what Dan and I have called the most fascinating team to watch unfold next season, in our opinion, and that would be the Aggies. 7.5 win total. New offensive coach Bobby Petrino brings the motorcycle to town. Stubborn Jimbo Fisher. Can this team, with the talent that they have, and they do have talent there, can they do some damage in the SEC West this year? Now, a few games stand out on their schedule, Brad. They go to Miami, then Auburn. They go to College Station. They welcome Alabama, and then they have to go to Neyland Stadium, and they draw South Carolina from the East as well. And let's not forget they end the season with a trip to Baton Rouge. So is Bobby Petrino going to be enough here to save Jimbo Fisher? That's a tough schedule.
A very tough schedule. But, man, the talent is there. That defensive line, I tweeted this a few weeks ago. When you look at size, talent, athleticism, is as good as any unit in college football. Now, I'm not talking defensive line. I'm talking any unit, O-line, wide receivers, defensive backs. That's how good it is, at least on paper. I like Stewart, their wide receiver. I think is first team All-American caliber. If they get a guy that can throw him the football, I think Wegman's better. They should be going from a freshman to sophomore season. I think the offense would be better. Not saying much. I bet over 7.5. Is it my favorite season win total bet that I made? No, because I bet over last year. And I'm like, how is this team going to lose 5 games? Well, they only won 5. So The coaching still leaves a lot to be desired as far as I'm concerned. And I know a lot of people love this Bobby Petrino hire. I don't. So I think he might be past his prime.
Wow.
Yeah, and I just wonder how that offensive room is going to get along, and if Jimbo can let it go too.
Well,
so it's going to be
It's
interesting.
going to implode. So
yeah, it's something to watch. So I think we agree on that.
All right, so let's move back north, and we are Penn State graduates, Brett and I both. We love the Big Ten. Let's talk Penn State. Let's talk about one of their rivals. I guess technically they don't have a rival, but Michigan State always plays them tough. Mel Tucker, off a brand new shiny contract, really had a letdown. He's the opposite of what Dabo, it appears. He does use the transfer portal a lot. He does bring in a lot of players, but now several players jump ship in the transfer portal away from the team. Their season total number is 5.5. Can Sparty get back on track, or is this going downhill quickly?
I think it's going downhill. I haven't bet it yet, but I would certainly lean under. I just not very optimistic, especially when these guys transferred post-spring. Keon Coleman, their best wide receiver, and all Big Ten caliber wide receiver. And I know a lot of people don't like Peyton Thorne, but the reality is I watched the spring game. I came away out of the spring game thinking, there's a quarterback competition going on, but I still think Thorne is your starting quarterback, at least to start the season. And to lose that post spring was a shock, to say the least. And guys like myself, what do? There's a thing called Game of the Year lines out. I can bet a lot of Michigan State games already, whether it's, against Michigan, against Ohio State, Penn State, Washington early in the season. Those lines moved against Michigan State considerably, 3-4 points. And I took a bunch of those. So I'm not buying Mel Tucker. Kudos to his agent and what they did with that contract. I would like somebody to negotiate for me as far as that's concerned, but that looks like a very negative ROI situation in East Lansing.
Good to note. And that is going to be something to watch this season too, because if it goes downhill fast,
he could be out of town.
He could be out of town soon. Let's move back to the top of the conference. Both Ohio State and Michigan, they sit at 10.5 for their win totals. Feels like Michigan is solid enough, certainly, to defend their back-to-back Big Ten titles. We know it's going to be a 1 or 2 game season for them, or at least it feels that way. So are you seeing any concerns with the Wolverines or not really?
No concerns for me. I don't know. I mean, if you're judging them against the Ohio States and Penn States of the world, or you're judging them their ability to beat a Georgia, I mean, I think those are two different questions. They've proven finally that they can take care of Ohio State. I think the Penn State game is probably a little bit tougher than people are giving that one credit for. I think Penn State's a legitimate top 10, maybe borderline top 5 team. So that's not an easy game. And look, Ohio State still, I know they've crushed the Buckeyes the last 2 years, but that's still a toss-up as far as I'm concerned. So you guys are right. 2-game season. I lean, this is square, but I would lean over 10.5 when it comes to the Wolverines. I don't see them losing another game on their schedule.
Well, the only thing I do question is it seems like some scandals have been following this team and weird stuff, whether it's Hamburger Gate with Jim Harbaugh or now Shemi Schembechler getting himself in some trouble and getting dismissed from the team. Do you look at that stuff at all when it comes to season win totals?
I think you have to look at, not just, off-field type stuff, but just overall team culture, especially in the transfer portal NIL era. I mean, I think you can get some fractured locker rooms. Do I think Michigan's a fractured locker room? No, even with the stuff that's going on. I mean, obviously, Jim Harbaugh is not everyone's cup of tea, but I'm not too worried about it, at least right now. And, man, you look at their schedule. I mean, even if they are a little bit fractured, who's beating them to start? I mean, they're going to be a significant favorite in each of their first 3, 4, 5 games.
Yeah, similar to last year. It seems like they'll get some cupcakes early. Now, you kind of mentioned it. Is everything okay in Columbus? Ryan Day losing to Michigan back-to-back years. I mean, that's bad news for any Ohio State coach, and he hasn't won a Big Ten title the last 2 years. He did almost upset Georgia on New Year's Eve, but it wasn't good enough. They have wide receivers, but what about the quarterback position? Do they have an offensive line? Are they going to play better on defense? We know there's talent on both sides of the ball, but questions about, do they have what it takes to get back to the playoffs, or do they still need help? And that means beating Michigan. Can they do it?
Oh, I think, of course, they can. I'm not going to feel too sorry for Ohio State. I mean, should have beaten Georgia. And, I mean, obviously, they would have been a significant favorite over TCU. So we're talking about maybe a play away from being the defending national champ. With that being said, do they have the quarterback this year? I don't think so. Now, what I saw in the spring game, it's going to be they don't have the type of quarterback that they've had the last 4 or 5 years under center in a Justin Fields or a CJ Stroud. I didn't see that. You mentioned the offensive line. That also appears to be a little bit of a weakness. They had to go out in the portal and get a guy. Probably needed to get another guy, in my opinion. But I thought both tackle positions were abysmal. Defensively, I'm actually more confident in. I think they'll be okay defensively. I think they will be improved in that second year under Jim Knowles as a defensive coordinator. But the schedule, not easy. I mean, obviously, you talk about the Michigan game. I mean, the whole season's going to depend on that. It's in Ann Arbor this year. They also got to go to Wisconsin, to Notre Dame, a couple of tricky road spots. Penn State's tough. So 10.5 is about right to me. If you had to really pinpoint it to me, I'd actually lean under. I could see a couple losses for the Buckeyes. Let's just say, hopefully, for Ryan Day's sake, not one of those losses against Michigan. Losing 3 times in a row to them would not be kind. And most places, 10-2 be celebrated, not in Columbus.
You're right, and especially, again, if one of those two is Michigan, look out. Let's talk about a dark horse in the playoff race, a team that we talk about a lot, considering where we're from, but that is Penn State. James Franklin, he also got a shiny new contract last year and followed it up by going 11-2 and winning the Rose Bowl against a top 10 opponent in Utah. That was his fourth 11-win season at Penn State. Now, once the playoff expands, Penn State is a team that's likely going to benefit the most from that. But Franklin does have a 5-star at QB. He's got a terrific running back duo coming back, a great tight end room, and also what appears to be an elite defense. Manny Diaz sticking around for year 2. But the issue has always been and will continue to be beating those elite teams. So for many years, it was just Ohio State. Now Michigan has established themselves as part of that category as well, the 2 teams we just talked about. So can James Franklin prove it on the field this year? He has the talent to make a run, it would appear. Their number's 9.5. Can Penn State at least get back to double-digit wins, Brad, or even get back to Indianapolis?
Yeah, so I'm sorry I lost you a little bit there. Talent's obviously not an issue for Penn State. I love the defense. I think it's top 5 caliber nationally, even with some of the losses that they had. I love their secondary. I actually like Manny Diaz quite a bit as a defensive coordinator. I love that front. When Dennis Sutton's a backup defensive end, I mean, that's saying a lot because I think he's all-American caliber. My question is, you mentioned the 5-star quarterback. I think there's still a concern. I know he's talented. He's got the rocket arm, Drew LR. Does he have the accuracy? And I think the biggest weakness on the team, and it's been, over the course of the last 10 years, it's kind of been historically a weakness on the team. That's been that offensive line. Now, their best offensive lineman sat out the spring game, but I don't know if one guy all of a sudden makes that offensive line room better. That would be my question. Do you have the quarterback and the offensive line to beat Ohio State or Michigan? Right now, I got to say no. But I love the running back room. I like the wide receiver room. I like everything about the team. I would still lean over 9.5. Even if they lost the Ohio State Michigan games, I don't see anybody really else on the schedule beating them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Last question, just again about strictly from a betting standpoint. If you're a week-to-week bettor, or as we get into the season, what is some of the advice that you give to folks when they're honing in on a game to maybe think about placing a bet, whether it's against the number or the over-under total? What are just some of the things that you see on a week-to-week basis that you give people advice to look at when it comes to some of these college football games?
Yeah, so loaded question. If you're trying to do it yourself, I would say focus in on a conference. Big Ten, small conference, you name it. Isolate yourself on a conference. Know that conference inside and out on a team-by-team basis. I would say don't be afraid to bet early in the week. I know a lot of people, an injury might creep up in practice and whatnot. That happens. I mean, that can happen in any bet. You could bet again, 5 minutes before kickoff, the starting quarterback could get hurt play 1. So don't worry about that. I would say focus on an individual conference, become an expert. Don't be afraid to bet early in the week. That's what I do. I mean, these lines open up on Sunday. I'll bet the entire board if I think there's value. So I like betting me versus the bookmaker instead of me versus the rest of the world, the entire market. So bet earlier in the week. Lines move earlier and earlier with each passing season. And since we're doing this podcast and I'm just not playing up to it, focus on the weather. I mean, you can have edges when it comes to weather, significant edges. And again, it's about as important of a factor, especially the wind. I want to mention the wind because a lot of people, I think, overreact to snow and whatnot and rain. The drainage systems and whatnot is much better than what it used to be. Focus on the wind. If you see forecasts with 15-plus mile-per-hour wind forecasts, whether it's college football or the NFL, and you trust that forecast, go under. You'll have a lot of positive expectation values that you'll make throughout the course of the season.
That is some great advice. So, Brad, two last things. One is tell everybody where they can find you.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at BradPower7. I mean, I work with a bunch of different companies and websites and podcasts. So I think the easiest way to follow me and all the work that I do is at BradPower7 on Twitter.
That's great. And lastly, we hope you'll come back with, if there's a big weather event next year,
we want to bring you on.
We'll bring you on to chat about it and how it might affect things. But this was a great conversation. We appreciate your time. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
Well, I mean, if you love college football, Brad Powers was the guy. And I think we hooked him with the concept of our podcast here. Remember, he really, really was hyping up the wind forecasts during these games.
That's phenomenal. And I guess, he's accustomed to finding things people don't think about. I found it so interesting that he thinks people overplay the rain and the snow, whereas you and I thought we were gaining some advantage there.
Right.
Perhaps it's too much, that it's so obvious, like when a tropical storm comes in.
Yeah.
to avoid those games or
Right.
favor the home team, whatever it is.
But the wind can affect the over-under a lot more even than the rain and the snow. I found that interesting. And then, like he said, too, he always wants to outsmart the guy making the numbers, the
Sure.
book, rather
Bet early.
than the public. So bet early, get out there on those Sunday nights when the numbers come out. We'll certainly take advantage of that this fall when we get back into our week-by-week predictions. But just in general, there was a lot to mine from that.
Yes.
He talked about how he was going to take the under for Alabama's win total. When's the last time that would be considered?
It's unreal.
The one thing that I disagreed with him on, and I think that there was one thing, when he was talking about Penn State, he has a lot of concerns or at least uncertainties about Drew Aller. He made a hype on that. He likes the running back room, likes the tight end room. He says he likes the wide receivers, he likes the defense. All of those things we've commented on. He's very concerned about Drew Aller and proving it on the field. And, well, to some extent, Dan, I get that because you've said it.
I need to see it, yes.
I got to tell you, though, I don't agree about the wide receivers. That's the area of concern for me. I
Yes.
don't think we have elite wide receivers.
No.
And if I would, in other words, if I was to say who is going to, is Drew Aller going to be more concerning than our wide receivers? I would say no. I think he's got to have people to throw the ball to. And right now, anybody can step up, and we might. We got some transfer guys, but I'm worried about the wide receiver room.
The only thing I will say about the wide receiver room, Franklin made a change at the coaching position for a reason, and maybe he thinks there is talent in the room and it needs to now be developed.
Could be right.
And so we got to see that
Yep.
this year. And we also, to me, there's been a lot of hype about the offensive line. And while I agree Olu is amazing, he's an animal out there at left tackle, I got to see it again. I got to believe in it. And Aller is not as mobile as Sean Clifford. And
At least not yet.
and what I want to say to every Penn State fan out there, and listen hard, I think there's going to be times we miss Sean Clifford because he was a gamer, and I think he invented some plays at the line. I think he made some plays that should have never happened. And I get the interceptions, I get some of the mistakes in critical moments, but I think he made a lot of something out of nothing sometimes.
I don't disagree with anything you've said, and I think that's going to be the fun to watch. Well, that's going to do it for us. We're going to be, of course, I think we'll play some of that Brad Powers interview again
Yes,
off and on
sir.
throughout the summer because just a lot of good stuff in there. We thank him for his time, and we thank you for yours. One more time, Dan, tell folks how they can find us.
Yeah, if you're mowing the lawn, getting the outdoors ready for Memorial Day weekend, you can find us Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, YouTube to get our podcast. Also, ABC27.com. We're coming up on a year of this, Brett, very soon. It's been a lot of fun. It's been a great ride, and we've had a lot of great content. We're just going to continue rolling.
We sure are, and we thank you so much. We hope you have a great holiday weekend that's
Yeah.
upon us.
Should be
And,
pretty nice across most of the Northeast.
I think so, too.
Unless you go to the Carolinas for the Outer Banks or something, that's where you'd hit some rain.
It's never too early to start thinking about college football. We will see you right back here next week, everybody.